Looking back, I should have noticed the signs sooner. Hindsight is sharp like that, isn't it? But in the moment, you never think the smallest things could mean something so significant. It was a regular Thursday evening, one of those unremarkable nights where everything felt routine. Sarah, my wife of 8 years, had been working late more frequently over the past month. Urgent deadlines, she'd said. A new client's breathing down my neck, and if I don't get this right, it'll be chaos. It sounded convincing. She had always been dedicated to her job, sometimes to a fault. I admired her for it, until I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. That night, she wasn't home yet. I tried to stay busy, cleaning up after dinner and tidying the bathroom. My mind wandered as I scrubbed the sink, thinking about her smile, the way her laugh used to fill the house, and how these days it felt quieter. It wasn't like us to feel distant. We'd been through so much together, built a life from scratch. But now there was a gap between us I couldn't seem to bridge, no matter how hard I tried. It happened so casually, as if fate wanted to nudge me awake. While reaching under the sink for a fresh sponge, my hand brushed against a small, unfamiliar package. I pulled it out and stared at it, my heart giving an odd little jolt. Birth control pills. My mind froze for a moment. Sarah had stopped taking these 2 years ago, or so she told me. She said they were messing with her hormones and that we didn't need them anymore. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe they were old, just something she'd forgotten to toss out. But the box was brand new, unopened, the foil on the packaging still gleaming under the harsh bathroom light. I stared at it, willing it to make sense. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the thoughts came anyway, uninvited and relentless. Why would she need these now? We'd been careful even without them. If anything, we'd been distant. It wasn't like we were trying to rekindle our romance on weeknights anymore. Life had gotten busy, maybe too busy. I put the package back exactly where I'd found it, my hands trembling slightly. When Sarah came home that night, she was all smiles, carrying the scent of her favorite perfume. She kissed me on the cheek, her eyes sparkling like nothing was out of the ordinary. She sat down at the table and launched into a story about her day. Her words animated, her gestures lively. But all I could do was nod. My mind caught on that small package under the sink. I didn't say anything. I told myself I'd bring it up later, maybe when the moment felt right. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. The dates on the package were fresh. I noticed it the next day when Sarah was at work, and I couldn't resist pulling it out again to take a closer look. The small print on the side confirmed it. This wasn't some forgotten box shoved into a corner. It was new, barely a few weeks old. The realization settled uncomfortably in my chest, like a weight pressing down on my ribs. I stared at it for longer than I'd like to admit, turning the package over in my hands as if some hidden detail might jump out and explain everything. But it didn't. The silence of the house made the questions in my head louder, each one more unwelcome than the last. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe there was an explanation I hadn't considered. But the doubts were already creeping in, connecting themselves to other moments I'd ignored. The late arrivals home. Those started a little over a month ago. She'd text me at the end of her workday, letting me know she had to stay late for meetings or to catch up on deadlines. At first, I hadn't thought much of it. Sarah had always been ambitious. Her career was important to her, and I respected that. But the pattern became hard to ignore. The meetings that seemed to stretch longer and longer. The vague excuses when I asked why she hadn't called or texted to let me know when she'd be back. Her aloofness. That was new, too. Sarah had always been talkative, eager to share every detail of her day. We used to sit at the kitchen table with cups of tea, swapping stories about work and venting about the little annoyances of life. Lately, though, she didn't seem interested in talking. She'd offer a smile, a quick, "It was fine," and retreat into her phone or the TV. When I pressed, she'd sigh, claiming she was too tired to talk. And the tiredness, how could I forget? "I'm just exhausted," she'd say, brushing me off when I suggested we plan a weekend away or go out for dinner. She used to love our date nights, but now they felt like chores she was reluctantly agreeing to. I'd catch her glancing at her phone during the meal, her attention elsewhere. Each of these things on their own might have seemed insignificant. People get tired. Work gets busy. But together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. I wanted to believe there was nothing to it. I wanted to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was just being paranoid. But the memories gnawed at me, refusing to let go. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. She was already asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I glanced over at her, and for the first time, I felt a pang of unfamiliarity. She looked like the woman I'd married, but there was something different now, something I couldn't quite put into words, and I hated myself for even thinking it. I told myself I'd ask her about the pills. I'd confront her with my doubts and give her the chance to explain. But then I thought about her smile, her laugh, and the way she looked at me with that light in her eyes. What if I was wrong? What if I pushed too hard and ruined something that didn't need fixing? The question swirled in my mind long after I heard the soft click of the clock signaling midnight. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and I had a sinking feeling that it wasn't going to come easily for a long time. The next morning, Sarah was in a rush. She barely had time to sip her coffee before she was gathering her things, her bag slung over her shoulder. She was humming softly, something she hadn't done in a while, and I couldn't help but notice how carefully she'd done her makeup. Her outfit was simple yet elegant, the kind of effort she didn't usually make for a long day at the office. "Big meeting today?" I asked, keeping my voice casual as I leaned against the counter. She paused for a moment, then smiled at me, warm and reassuring. "Yeah, something like that. Don't wait up for me tonight. Okay? Might be another late one." I nodded, returning the smile even though my gut was twisting. She stepped closer, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and said, "Love you," before heading out the door. I waited until the sound of her car faded down the street before grabbing my keys. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. Sitting at home, replaying the same doubts over and over wasn't an option anymore. 15 minutes later, I was on the road, keeping a careful distance as I tailed her car. My heart raced as I gripped the steering wheel, the adrenaline coursing through me like I was breaking some unspoken rule. I felt ridiculous. I felt guilty, but I couldn't stop myself. At first, her route seemed normal, familiar. She took the usual turns toward her office, and for a moment, I thought I'd been wrong, that I'd overreacted. But then she made an unexpected turn, one that led away from the office district and toward a part of town I knew well, a part of town we rarely visited. It was an elite area, known for its upscale restaurants, trendy coffee shops, and exclusive clubs. It was the kind of place where people went to be seen, where everything was overpriced and meticulously curated. Sarah didn't have any business there, at least none that she'd ever mentioned. She pulled into the lot of a small but stylish coffee shop tucked between a designer boutique and a wine bar. I parked a few blocks away, far enough that she wouldn't notice me but close enough to keep an eye on her. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the engine. What was I doing? This wasn't me. But as I watched her step out of the car, smoothing her dress and glancing at her reflection in the window, I knew I couldn't just drive away. She walked into the coffee shop with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement. Through the large windows, I saw her approach the counter and order something, her smile bright and easy as she spoke to the barista. It was a smile I hadn't seen in weeks, maybe longer. She took her drink, a latte, by the looks of it, and chose a table near the window, her phone in hand. For a moment, I thought that maybe this was it. Maybe she just wanted a nicer coffee than what we had at home. But as I watched her glance at her phone, her eyes flicking toward the door every now and then, I knew there was more to it. I waited in the car, my thoughts a chaotic tangle. What was she doing here? Was she meeting someone? Every minute felt like an hour as I watched her sip her drink, her body language calm yet alert. She wasn't just killing time. She was waiting for something, or someone. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my pulse pounding in my ears. Part of me wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, to put an end to this sick feeling in my stomach. But another part of me, one that was louder, stronger, knew I had to wait. If there was more to this, I needed to see it for myself. So I sat there watching, waiting, wondering. And the longer I waited, the more certain I became that whatever was happening, it wasn't innocent. It felt like time had slowed down, each second stretching into eternity as I sat in my car, parked a safe distance from the coffee shop. My eyes followed Sarah's every move, her latte cup barely touched, her gaze darting occasionally toward the entrance. The way she fidgeted with her phone was unlike her. Normally, Sarah was composed, her confidence steady and unwavering. But now she seemed nervous. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Just when I started to wonder if I'd miscalculated the whole situation, a shift in her demeanor caught my attention. She glanced at the clock on her phone, tucked it into her purse, and stood up. Her movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed. She exited the coffee shop, the door jingling behind her, and walked briskly back to her car. But she didn't drive off immediately. Instead, she opened the trunk and pulled out a garment bag I hadn't noticed before. I watched as she disappeared behind her car, using the door as a makeshift shield, and emerged minutes later transformed. My stomach twisted as I took in her outfit, a fitted black dress that clung to her figure, paired with heels I hadn't seen her wear in years. This wasn't the outfit of someone heading to a client meeting or grabbing a quick coffee before work. This was intentional. The kind of intentional that makes you feel sick when you think about why. She adjusted her hair, checked her reflection in the side mirror, and then walked with purpose down the street. My gaze followed her, and that's when I saw him. He was waiting near the entrance of an upscale building, standing casually with his hands in his pockets. Even from a distance, I recognized him immediately. Mark, her colleague, the one she'd mentioned in passing so many times over the last few months. Mark's been helping me so much with this project, she'd said once. I don't know how I'd manage without him. Mark stepped forward to greet her, his face lighting up in a way that felt too warm for a work interaction. And Sarah smiled back at him, that same smile she used to save for me. The smile that once made me feel like the luckiest man alive. What happened next made my blood run cold. They hugged, but it wasn't the kind of hug colleagues exchanged. It wasn't the polite, professional embrace of coworkers congratulating each other on a job well done. It was tender, intimate. His hands lingered on her waist a second too long, and her arms wrapped around his shoulders as though they'd done this before. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. My mind was spinning, scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't crush me. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew better. The two of them walked into the building together, their steps synchronized like they'd been doing this for months. Mark opened the door for her, and she gave him a playful glance as she stepped inside. I watched until they disappeared from view, the heavy glass door closing behind them. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands felt numb, and my heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The rational part of me screamed that I should drive away, that I shouldn't look any deeper. But the part of me that needed answers, the part of me that was already broken, overpowered everything else. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the camera app. Felt invasive, wrong even, but I couldn't stop myself. I snapped a few photos of Sarah walking up to Mark, of their embrace, of the moment they entered the building. Proof. Each click of the camera felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. I sat back in my seat, staring at the photos. It didn't feel real. How could this be the same woman I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade? The woman who promised me forever? My head spun as questions poured in. Was this the first time? Had they been meeting like this all along? What was she doing in that building with him? I leaned my head against the steering wheel, taking deep breaths to steady myself. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, sharp and searing, but it was accompanied by something worse: grief. I stayed parked there for what felt like hours, staring at the door they'd walked through, willing them to come out so I could make sense of what I'd seen. But deep down, I already knew there was no explanation that could undo what I'd just witnessed. This was the moment everything changed. My suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were facts. And now I had to decide what to do with them. I sat in the living room that evening, the lights off, the house bathed in shadows. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the old wood floors as I shifted in my seat. My phone lay on the coffee table in front of me, the photos I'd taken still open on the screen. Next to it sat the package of pills I'd found in the bathroom days earlier, the damning evidence that had led me to this moment. The weight in my chest was unbearable. I felt hollow and heavy all at once, anger and sorrow swirling together into something I couldn't define. I'd replayed every memory, every conversation, every sign I'd missed over the past few months. And each one led me back to the same inescapable conclusion. She was cheating on me. When I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway, my heart began to race. I gripped the armrest of the chair, my knuckles white, as her footsteps approached the front door. The sound of her key turning in the lock felt deafening in the silence. The door opened, and Sarah stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She flipped on the light in the entryway, then paused when she saw the darkened living room and me sitting there, waiting. "Kyle?" she said, her voice hesitant, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I didn't answer right away. I just watched her, studying her face, her body language. She set her bag down by the door, her movements slightly slower than usual, almost cautious. "We need to talk," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she stepped closer, stopping at the edge of the room. "What's going on? You're scaring me." I leaned forward, picking up my phone from the table. I unlocked it and turned the screen toward her, the photos of her and Mark lighting up the space between us. Her face went pale instantly. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice low but steady. Sarah's eyes darted between me and the phone, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find the right words. "Kyle, I don't know what you think you saw, but don't." I cut her off, my tone sharper now. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it looks like." She took a step back, her hands fidgeting at her sides. "It's not. I mean, this is a misunderstanding. Mark and I were just—" "Save it," I snapped, standing up. I picked up the package of pills from the table and held them up. "Explain this, Sarah. Explain why you're taking these when you told me 2 years ago you didn't need them anymore." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a mask of defiance. "You went through my stuff?" she said, her tone accusatory, like I was the one who had crossed the line. "Don't even try to flip this around on me." I shot back. "I wouldn't have had to if you hadn't been sneaking around behind my back." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off again. "I saw you, Sarah. I followed you this morning. I saw you meet Mark. I saw the way you hugged him, the way you looked at him. I saw you walk into that building together. And now you're going to stand here and lie to my face." Her shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time her defiance faltered. She glanced down at the floor, her jaw tightening. "Kyle, just tell me the truth," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of the moment. "How long has this been going on?" There was a long pause, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs. I sank back into the chair, my head in my hands as I tried to process what she just said. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she continued, her voice trembling. It just did. Mark and I started working closely on this big project, and we clicked. He's funny and interesting and attentive. He noticed things about me, Kyle. Things you stopped noticing a long time ago." I looked up at her, my chest burning with anger and betrayal. "So this is my fault now? Is that what you're saying?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm not blaming you. I've been so tired, Kyle. Tired of feeling invisible. Tired of feeling like we're just going through the motions. Mark made me feel alive again. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I could trust with my life. But all I saw was a stranger standing in my living room, trying to justify the destruction of our marriage. "I trusted you," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me?" She started to cry, her tears falling silently as she wiped at her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Well, congratulations, Sarah. You did." The weight of her betrayal settled over me like a crushing tide, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. Her confession hit me like a hammer, each word driving deeper into my chest until I felt like I couldn't breathe. She stood in front of me, her face streaked with tears, her lips trembling as she tried to say something, anything, that would make her betrayal seem less devastating. But nothing she could say would soften the blow. "I didn't want it to get this far," she said, her voice shaky. "I never planned for this to happen. But Kyle, don't you see? We've been drifting apart for a long time. I felt so alone. Alone." The word echoed in my mind, sparking a flicker of anger that threatened to consume me. Alone? After everything I'd done to build this life with her, after all the sacrifices, she had the audacity to say she felt alone? "Don't you dare," I said, my voice low and cold, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Don't you dare stand there and try to justify what you've done by making me the bad guy." "I'm not," she started, but I didn't let her finish. "You're not," I snapped, my voice rising. "You're not blaming me? Because it sure sounds like you are. You're the one who lied. You're the one who cheated. And now you're telling me it's because I didn't, what? Entertain you enough? Make you feel special enough? What exactly do you want me to say, Sarah?" Her face hardened then, the tears replaced by a spark of defiance. "You want to know the truth, Kyle? Fine. You're boring. You're predictable. Everything about our life is just routine. It's like we've been stuck on repeat for years. And I couldn't take it anymore. Mark, he's exciting. He's spontaneous. He made me feel things I haven't felt in years." Her words sliced through me, each one sharper than the last. Boring. Predictable. Routine. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I'd built my life with and the person standing in front of me now. It was like looking at a stranger wearing her face. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice quieter now, the anger giving way to something colder, more resolute. "You're standing here, tearing apart everything we've built. And for what? Because you were bored? Because you wanted some excitement? Do you have any idea what you've done?" She flinched just slightly, but then her chin lifted. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said again, but the words rang hollow. "You didn't just hurt me," I said, my voice steady now, the fire inside me replaced by a chilling clarity. "You destroyed us. You destroyed our marriage. And the worst part? I don't think you even care. Not really." "Of course I care," she shot back, the tears returning to her eyes. "I love you, Kyle. I always have. But don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't say that. You don't get to say that. Not after everything you've done. If you loved me, if you cared about this marriage, you wouldn't have done this." She opened her mouth to respond, but I shook my head. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said. "None of this matters anymore. Because I'm done, Sarah. I'm done trying to fix something you clearly didn't care about enough to save. Our marriage. It's over." The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth, like I was watching myself from the outside. But as soon as I said them, I knew they were true. There was no going back from this. Sarah stared at me, her face crumpling as the reality of what I'd said sank in. "Kyle, please," she whispered, stepping closer. "We can work through this. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't throw it all away." I took a step back, putting distance between us. "I didn't throw it away, Sarah. You did. And now you have to live with that." She reached for me, but I turned away, heading for the stairs. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, and I didn't trust myself to keep it together if I stayed in the same room. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight," I said over my shoulder, my voice devoid of emotion. "You can figure out where you're going to stay tomorrow." I didn't wait for her response. I climbed the stairs and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as the weight of everything crashed down on me. My chest ached, my head pounded, and my hands shook as I tried to process what had just happened. I'd loved her. I trusted her. And now all of that was gone. I stared at the ceiling, the silence of the room pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. There was no going back. This was the end of everything we'd built together, and I knew I had to let it go. But that didn't make the pain any less excruciating. Tomorrow I'd figure out the next steps. But for now, all I could do was sit in the darkness and try to hold myself together, piece by shattered piece. That evening I left the house. Her voice trailed behind me as I walked out the door, rising and breaking with sobs and pleas that I couldn't bring myself to care about anymore. "Kyle, please, don't go like this. We need to talk." Her words bounced off me, hollow and meaningless. She'd already said enough, and there was nothing left for me to hear. I grabbed my keys from the entryway table, my footsteps deliberate but heavy as I walked to the car. The air outside was cool, the kind of crisp night that would normally bring a sense of peace. But tonight it felt sharp and cutting. As I started the engine, I glanced at the house through the rearview mirror. The living room light spilled out onto the lawn, illuminating Sarah's silhouette as she stood at the window. Her shoulders shook, and she pressed her hands to the glass, as if trying to hold on to me from a distance. But I didn't linger. I backed out of the driveway and drove off into the night, leaving her behind. I didn't know where I was going. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the tension radiating through my body as the empty streets stretched out ahead of me. I didn't have a plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, not with her, not after everything that had happened. The silence in the car was deafening at first, but as the miles passed, a strange feeling began to settle over me. It wasn't peace, nowhere near that, but it was something close to relief. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel trapped. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest for so long was lifting, piece by piece. I kept driving, the city lights blinking in the distance as I neared the heart of town. The roads were quiet, the world around me still. It felt like I was the only person awake, caught in the strange in-between space where time didn't quite matter. Eventually, I spotted a neon sign glowing in the distance. Johnny's Diner, open 24/7. It was the kind of place you'd only find on nights like this, tucked away on the edge of the city, a refuge for the sleepless and the lost. I pulled into the small parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and an older man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner booth. The air smelled of burnt coffee and frying bacon, and the soft hum of an old jukebox filled the silence. I slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking under my weight. The waitress approached, her notepad in hand, and gave me a polite but distracted smile. "Coffee, please," I said, my voice hoarse from the emotions I'd been choking down all evening. She nodded, pouring a cup from the pot she carried, and set it in front of me without a word. I stared at the steaming liquid, the dark surface reflecting the fluorescent lights above. For the first time since I'd walked out of the house, I allowed myself to think, really think, about what had happened, about everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal, the lies, the years of my life that now felt wasted. It was all there, swirling in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. But beneath it all, I felt a faint but undeniable flicker of something new, freedom. For months, maybe longer, I'd been holding on to something that was already broken, too afraid to face the truth. Now that I realized how suffocating it had been to carry the weight of a love that wasn't real anymore. I took a sip of the coffee, the bitter taste grounding me in the present. The tears I'd been holding back all night finally came, hot and silent as they spilled down my cheeks. I didn't try to stop them. For once, I let myself feel everything. The anger, the hurt, the relief, the uncertainty of what came next. The waitress noticed, her gaze lingering for a moment, but she didn't say anything. She just refilled my cup and walked away, giving me the space I didn't know I needed. I sat there for hours, staring out the window as the night faded into dawn. The city slowly came to life around me, the streets outside filling with early risers and delivery trucks. I didn't have answers yet, and I didn't know where I'd go from here. But as the first light of morning spilled across the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward, ready to take the first steps into a future I couldn't quite picture yet. But it would be mine, and that was enough. The first rays of sunlight spilled through the diner's window, casting a soft glow on the table in front of me. My coffee had long gone cold, untouched for the last hour as I sat in quiet reflection. Something about the dawn felt symbolic, like the universe was reminding me that every night ends, no matter how long or dark it feels. I'd been sitting there for hours, untangling the web of emotions that had gripped me since Sarah's confession. Anger, betrayal, grief, they all had their place, rising and falling in waves as I replayed the last few days in my mind. But beneath it all, a new feeling was beginning to take root. Something I hadn't expected. Clarity. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something new. A blank slate, free from the lies, the doubt, and the constant sense that I wasn't enough. For so long, I'd been trying to hold together a life that had been quietly unraveling. I'd ignored the signs, brushed aside the cracks, convinced myself that things could go back to the way they used to be if I just tried hard enough. But that wasn't how it worked, was it? Love, real love, didn't need to be chased or forced. It didn't make you feel like a second choice. I deserved more. It was a simple realization, but it hit me with a force that left me breathless. I deserved someone who would choose me every day, who wouldn't look for distractions or excitement in someone else. Someone who valued the life we built together and didn't treat it like an afterthought. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up with Sarah's contact at the top of my recent calls. For a moment, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over her name. Her messages were still there too, dozens of them. Some warm and loving, others rushed and distant. They told a story of what we had been and what we'd become. With a deep breath, I began deleting them. One by one, I erased every text, every voicemail, every reminder of the woman who had betrayed me. When I reached her number, I hesitated. A small part of me wanted to hold on, to keep that connection alive, even if it was just out of habit. But I knew better. Holding on wouldn't help me heal. I hit delete, and just like that, she was gone from my phone. It felt symbolic, like closing a door that I'd been afraid to shut. The weight I'd been carrying didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted, lightened. It was as if I'd finally taken the first step away from the wreckage and toward something unknown but promising. I paid my bill and stepped outside, the cool morning air filling my lungs as I looked out at the empty street. The world felt different somehow, sharper and more vivid. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking backward. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know where I'd go or how long it would take to rebuild. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever path I chose, it would be mine. There was a strange kind of freedom in that thought. It wasn't about revenge or proving Sarah wrong. It wasn't about finding someone else to fill the void. It was about finding myself again, piece by piece, and creating a life I could be proud of. As I got into my car, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. One where I would write every line, make every choice, and live every moment on my own terms. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt ready to embrace it.